Next up is Rupa Makadia. Rupa Makadia is an associate director at Janssen, working in epidemiology analytics with a background in biomedical informatics. Her previous experience includes working for large payers and health systems. Rupa has experience conducting epidemiologic analyses of patient populations in various therapeutic areas using observational claims data at Janssen, and has been leading efforts within Janssen to use observational data for clinical trial feasibility using OHDSI tools.
Hi everyone, today I'll be presenting a study, the OHDSI-enabled distributed network analysis for clinical trial feasibility, a collaborative case study to inform a pediatrics randomized trial. So what is clinical trial feasibility, and what important insights can we generate? We can take a clinical trial protocol and evaluate the criteria in Atlas by constructing a cohort of the population in an applicable database. From these analyses, we can learn about the population that may be eligible for a trial, the impact of the various criteria have on the protocol individually or how they are affected in combination, as well as run variations of the criteria. We can use this information to drive operational insights for recruitment and possibly avoid costly and time-limiting protocol amendments in the future. Pediatric trials are often very difficult to enroll due to factors related to parents and their children, lack of knowledge, which really translate to the fact that there aren't many studies done in pediatrics as there are in adults, which can leave patients and children with limited information to make a decision about enrolling in a clinical trial. With these types of roadblocks, the question is often raised about how we can inform our protocol, or rather start to gain a better understanding of our population. And the million-dollar question, how will we be able to find these patients so that we can bring a new intervention to market in a timely fashion? This study specifically is looking at understanding feasibility at a two-site observational claims data and EHR through PedsNet to inform a phase 3 trial for diabetes. So let's walk through what clinical trial feasibility is. We first need to identify some data sets that are appropriate for our study. And in this case, I use the IBM CCAE, IBM Medicaid, and our Optum data set. So these data sets contain parents and their dependents, their children, and this can give us a lens into the different populations of kids. Second, we need to set our index criteria. So we find patients that are aged 10 to 17 with a type 2 diabetes diagnosis and at least a year of enrollment. We're looking for an additional type 2 diabetes diagnosis before the index and some limited information about type 1, understanding that lots of children probably have a diagnosis of type 1 in their record and they may not actually have it. Then we apply all the criteria that were specified in the protocol. So there's 31 criteria that we can evaluate. We create concept sets for these rules and apply time bounds. And last, we can hit generate in Atlas, and we can get patient counts for our index, counts for the individual rules, and how well our entire protocol matched all of the criteria that we evaluated. So in essence, we've really created a clinical trial population in an observational claims data set. So we had all of the information that we needed to assess our protocol, understand the population, but it still didn't really answer the question about how we would be able to confirm that our feasibility was truly reflective of this population in question. So we knew we had to collaborate, and what better way than to reach out to our OHDSI friends at PedsNet. PedsNet is a large EHR system that specializes in pediatric care across the United States. By utilizing the OHDSI framework, we were able to sit down in one day and share JSON from Atlas and define our analysis to also accommodate new data elements that were available in PedsNet but not readily available in our claims data, and replicate and analyze our protocol feasibility. We didn't really need to touch any of the patient level data and initiated the first steps to be able to start the process of finding patients that may qualify for our study and understand their characteristics. So what did we find? So this diagram here represents the protocol data elements by domain. So the inner ring represents the percentage of protocol criteria, and the outer represents the amount of criteria we were able to evaluate. So this is what we could look at in the observational claims. Here's what we could look at in the PEDSNet data set. So we were able to evaluate about 30% of the conditions, 20% of the measurements. When we evaluated conditions, the procedures, observations, they both measured very similarly in the claims and the PEDSNet. But the PEDSNet data offered us additional insights on the laboratory measures. So we were able to evaluate about 60 to 70% of our protocol using these data sets and Atlas. So the types of criteria that we were able to evaluate are kind of represented in this word cloud here. So we were looking for things like HbA1c values, hypoglycemia in the past, and we found that no single criteria affected our protocol more than 10% in either of these data sets. But the biggest drop-off that we saw for patients was around things like prior medication use, prior history of diabetes. So another idea or a type of analysis that we can address with feasibility is we can think about how to evaluate thresholds within a given criteria. So here's a graph of HbA1c values in the PEDSNet database. And in our protocol, it was specified that patients must be between 6.5 and 10.5. And here we can see that about a quarter of the patients fall below that line and a quarter of the patients fall above that line. Understanding that there may be some clinical significance in assigning this range, we can use this type of analysis to add additional value by helping us learn about our criteria and how we construct them. So what did we find in terms of our total protocol? So we want to understand how many people match all the criteria that we evaluated. So between all the data sets that we looked at, the range varied from 59% to about 68%. So this is really telling us that we have pretty good concordance amongst these databases to look at our population. So lastly, I just want to leave you all with a few takeaways. So one, today I've demonstrated a use case for Atlas that has potential to help define how we write clinical trial protocols by utilizing the data we have on millions of patients. Also, by utilizing the OHDSI network, we can lay the groundwork by connecting with our partners that have access to patient-level data to help find and recruit patients for clinical trials and hopefully bring new interventions to patients in need. Finally, I'd like to thank all of my collaborators, specifically Hania Razagi and Dr. Charlie Bailey. Thank you.